Please welcome this evening's guest moderator, Thelma Adams from Yahoo Movies, and our special guest, Frances Lawrence.
Good evening. I'm Thelma. This is Frances.
Hello.
Hi. So are you stoked to see the movie now? Very exciting. I have seen it, and you've seen it many times. One of the things I noticed in the trailer, it says last year was Child's Play, and obviously you weren't the director of the first movie. So how does that resonate for you as someone who came on as the director in the second movie?
Well, this time it's a very different story. I think that was actually the really exciting thing for me. That this chapter for me is where the story in the Hunger Games trilogy really breaks open, where all the real themes start to kick in. It becomes a lot more political, I think more emotionally intense. But also, on a smaller level, it truly is different. The games are different this time because Katniss and Peeta are the youngest. All the tributes are much older.
Yeah, just when you thought you got out, they pull you back in. It's
Yes,
that
exactly.
same. And it gets kicked up a notch. Now, are you shooting Mockingjay 1 and 2, the next two? Are you doing them as one big...
Yeah, when we started cutting Catching Fire, we started to prep Mockingjay 1 and 2. Mockingjay, the book, is being split into two movies, which we're shooting back to back.
Which I'm
as one
curious
solid
about,
story.
having read the book, the third book, how you parse the third book, because they all seem to be that same kind of a lot of setup and then the games, a lot of setup and then the battle. How did you split Mockingjay?
Well, I can't really get too specific about the exact spot where we split it, but
Right.
we found two distinct, completely separate stories within Mockingjay that we're telling with each of those chapters.
Well, I'm going to ask you one question, like the silly tabloid question. Just have to toss it out, get it done. Who is the biggest Lawrence on set?
Who's the biggest Lawrence?
Yes, I mean, just like, has it been interesting? Like, when Jennifer Lawrence came on to the first one, she was an ingenue. And then when you got her to do this movie, she's an enormous star with an Oscar.
Yeah.
So what was that like? Just give us a nugget of that.
I have to say she's an amazing girl. She's very down to earth. She's very humble. She's really, really talented. Very good at what she does. And so very easy to work with. Nothing changed whatsoever. She's really funny to be with. But she won the Oscar and was back in the mud in the jungle of Hawaii with us 2 days later. And it was business as usual. It was the same story.
And now you've basically traveled the world with this movie.
Yeah, we have. This is tonight is kind of the last stop of the promotional tour for the film, and I think it starts playing. Today's Wednesday, right? Yes, it starts playing in theaters tomorrow.
Tomorrow at like 10 at night? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some double features with the first movie that started about 5 o'clock tomorrow, and then it's starting at about 8 o'clock. I think we start late shows.
Now, when you came into this, obviously you'd seen the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever your opinion of it or your assessment of it, what was your approach? What did you want to bring to the second one?
Well,
and on into the end.
Yeah, for me, it all came from the source material. I was doing a pilot when actually cutting a pilot in LA when I got the news or read on the internet that Gary Ross had dropped out of doing the other movie, doing Catching Fire. And a few days later, I got a call from my agent saying that Nina Jacobson, the producer, and the people at Lionsgate wanted to know if I wanted to meet and sit down about possibly doing the film. I had read the books earlier when I was doing another film and really enjoyed them. And I said, well, why don't you give me the weekend? I'm going to reread Catching Fire and make sure there's enough for me to kind of really sink my teeth into. I had never really I've never done a sequel before. I'd never done an episode of television that somebody else had created. So I had never inherited a cast or had already sort of preset parameters in terms of making a movie.
Right.
So I wanted to think about it. But very quickly, in rereading the book, I saw that there was a lot for me to sink my teeth into, that this is the movie where everything really opens up.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about the things that really hooked you?
Sure. Well, I think it was really that this is the first time the themes of the stories really start to kick in. Suzanne decided to write...
Suzanne Collins.
Suzanne Collins decided to write a series of books about the consequence of war for teenagers. And it was that idea, the consequence of war and the consequence of violence and the kind of toll it takes on people, that really interested me. And this is where we start to see that. And so even in the first shots of the movie, you start to see that Katniss is a changed person.
Right.
And that she's been
hunting,
changed
yeah.
from being in the games, and that Peeta's been affected from being in the games. And you start to see all the other tributes that have survived the games are a bit damaged. And there's, facets of PTSD, post-traumatic stress. There's flashbacks, there's night terrors, and so starting to explore those ideas was really, really interesting to me. I also saw, too, that there were, brand new opportunities for casting. So there was a bunch of new cast members that I could bring in that would carry through the rest of the stories.
Where did you start with that? I mean, the Finnick character is the one that caught all the press.
Yeah, but I actually didn't start with Finnick. We started with the character of Plutarch Heavensbee, who's now played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. And so he was the first person that we went after. And he was actually here. He lives here, but he was here on Broadway in Death of a Salesman. And he didn't really want to get involved until he was kind of done with that run. But once he finished, he read the books because he didn't really know anything about them beforehand, and was really moved by them. And, really liked the idea of having, being in scenes with Jennifer and with Donald Sutherland.
It's a pivotal role.
Yeah, and signed on very quickly. And also just liked where his character goes. He's an interesting guy.
Right. And also Jeffrey Wright, who's one of my favorite New York actors.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite actors,
And now catching
too.
up, I've been binge-watching Boardwalk Empire.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't seen him in it yet.
Yeah.
No, I'm excited to see him.
Dr. Narcissus. He's really good. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah, me too. I'd actually tried to get him in my first movie. I did a movie called Constantine back in 2003 that I tried to get him to be in, and it didn't work out. So I've been wanting to work with him for a long time. And when this part of Beatty came up, who's one of the new tributes, I went to him. And again, he was also very moved by the ideas in the series and by the quality of the actors that were already involved. And we had a nice conversation on the phone, and he joined up. And so the sort of the same.
And
then
also, when
Amanda
you talk
Plummer.
about when you talk about themes, one of the themes that he brings out is that winning a war isn't just brawn. It's not who's, as Katniss displayed in the first movie, but also it's the world of the mind. If you know how to build things, if you know how to make things, if you know tactics, it gives you an advantage, even if physically you're not the strongest.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you want to throw to the first clip?
Sure.
Shall we?
Yeah. Before we play this, let me set it up for everybody. There's for those of you that know the book, this is part of the first stop of the Victory Tour in District 11. And for those of you that don't, this movie starts 6 months after the end of the last film. And it's winter, and Katniss and Peeta, because they're victors of the Hunger Games, must now go on a victory tour. And they've become distant from one another. And before she embarks on this tour, President Snow, played by Donald Sutherland, has come to her and said that she has to go out and prove to all the districts that she won the games and did what she did at the end of the games in the last movie because she loved Peeta, not because she was being rebellious. Because this rebellious act at the end of the last movie has started uprisings. And so she's just come to District 11. She hasn't been speaking about loving Peeta. Instead, she spoke from her heart and caused a just very disturbing act to take place. And this is the aftermath of that.
It's heavy. It's not episodic. This is it. And one of the things that we were talking about in the back room is that as much as this is an action movie, it's the intimate moments that resonate, and this is one of them. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, it almost isn't an action movie at all. I mean, there's action in it, but it's really all about character and relationships and the story. And Suzanne Collins, when she wrote this, she wrote it very specifically in the point of view of Katniss Everdeen, and really kind of never breaks that. We actually get the opportunity to break that a little bit in this film, but really we're with Katniss for 95% of the time. And so to me, it's always about what, emotion that she's feeling, what's going on in her head, the psychology of Katniss.
As a teenager, she's always asking, like, who am I? And if I do this, what does it mean? And what are the ramifications? Not just, as you said, this is a more political story, the second one, and on into the future. But she's trying to define who she is as a person.
Oh, absolutely. But I think one of the great things about her as a character is that she's very human, and she has very human, relatable, basic needs and wants, right? She wants her life back. Even though it's not a great life, she just wants her normal life back, and they're not letting her do that. She wants to protect her family. She wants to survive.
She wants to love who she wants to love.
Exactly, but I mean, what I even like about her and the love story, because the love triangle in this starts to come up to the surface, is even that she doesn't even have time for that. She's not thinking about which boy she loves. Again, it has all to do with survival. And so if you want your life back, you would start to gravitate toward the childhood friend, the friend that you go hunting with, the friend that helps you provide for your family. And you distance yourself from the kid that went through the games with you, right? Because he's just a reminder of those games, and it just reminds you of the pain and the PTSD. But suddenly, if you're pulled back into that world, you gravitate back toward that person because you find comfort in being with that person because of the shared experience of the trauma. But I really like that it's all in the psychology.
That's a little bit of an older person interpretation, only because there's a lot of hormones involved in this.
But I don't know. I would disagree a little bit, just because I think that it's like what I think is so great about her as a character is that she's, everything is very intense, but it's very believable, and it's all about survival and all about protection of the family, and just making it through. There's nothing sort of frivolous, and I think sometimes when things are that intense and your life is at stake and other people's lives are at stake every single second of the day, you don't have time to be thinking about relationships. Like, they're just organic to within that experience.
Moment to moment, you're saying. Interesting, because I would say maybe not so much, but that's fine. I'm interested too, because it is, as much as you say it's not an action movie, I saw it on IMAX, and I think there must be challenges when you're taking these intimate scenes, and when we show the other clip, if we do show it, where it's just two faces, but they're shown on a screen, where you could have Prometheus, where you could have, and how do you keep that intimacy when you can see kind of every pore on Jennifer Lawrence's face? What do you do?
I think a lot of that, in terms of sort of choosing the coverage of a scene for intimate moments and emotional beats of the movie when thinking about the large format of the screen, there's a few things that come into play. One is, given any kind of a movie screen, any movie screen is large, right? And so you have to be as sparing as possible with, extreme close-ups, but even more so with IMAX, because IMAX is such a large format, and you're dealing with a screen that can sometimes be 10 stories tall. And if you have people that are sitting up in the front row and you want them to look at the character's eyes, they might have to look 8 or 9 stories up to see the character's eyes. So you have to actually sort of let the faces sink back in the frame a little bit.
Right.
And close-ups are a little looser and a little more distant in IMAX than they would be in a normal widescreen 2:4:0 aspect ratio.
Should we show the other clip just because it's another intimate moment? Do you want to set it up? This is the one with Gale.
Oh, sure. Yes. This is this is a scene with Katniss and Gale, and she's just come back from the victory tour, and she knows that she's failed in her mission that President Snow has sent her on, and she's worried for her life and her family's life, and also Gale's life, that President Snow has threatened Gale, and she's just asked him to run away, and they're having an argument.
So that is an example of what we were talking about, of having an intimate scene. It's also an explosive scene because it's a moment where they're kind of seem to be stepping onto different paths.
Yeah, absolutely. This is also the movie. I mean, there's a moment before the previous clip where Pete has given a speech, and Katniss is watching him speak to the population of District 11, and you start to see that he puts down the cards he's been given, and he gives a very eloquent speech, and you start to see what he begins to represent in these stories, and that he's eloquent and that he speaks for peace, and this is where you start
And
to
that's
see
his-
the kind of
right.
fire of rage and war and rebellion that's in Gale, and so they start to represent two completely different things that she's caught between.
Right. And PETA starts to rise as he speaks in this episode. Can we call it an episode in this
Sure.
movie? In this sequel, as he speaks, he becomes nobler. You see what he has to offer.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
And that's one thing about these movies is as time progresses, everybody gets honed and you see more of them.
Yeah, and what's also important about the scene that we just saw a little clip of is Katniss. Again, this is one of the things that I think makes her very relatable and very human, is this sort of reluctance for any kind of the responsibility. She doesn't want people looking up to her. She doesn't want to be the leader of a rebellion. She doesn't want that kind of responsibility, which would be
Right.
completely understandable.
Which also goes back to the fact, which was in the first one, that she had to be the responsible party in her family when her father was killed and her mother couldn't handle it. So she's used to assuming that role, but it's another big step to assume it for a revolution.
Right.
It's interesting. When we talked about Plutarch, there's a scene with Plutarch, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. He's the new game maker because they killed the last one. And he's talking to President Snow, and he says, well, we're going to give them, and I can't remember the exact words, we're going to do flogging, and we're going to do, and I want to say fashion, but fashion is not right.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, sure,
So
yeah.
can you talk about, because that's one of the major themes, that the Capitol is always manipulating the battle, manipulating these people, and trying to play games that are also maybe parallel to Hollywood, maybe parallel to what the media is doing.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an interesting scene. It's one of the scenes that was not in the book.
Oh, okay, good. That was
that's
another
a little
question.
bit of the kind of world growth. So one of the interesting things we did when developing this book into a screenplay is that we created more scenes for Philip's character and Donald Sutherland. And they had to be sort of backwards engineered because we knew certain things had to happen in Katniss's life and had to imagine what was happening behind the scenes to make those things happen. So you start to think about those events and go back to think about, okay, what was the moment where these decisions were made with Philip Seymour Hoffman's character and Donald Sutherland's character? And we had to sort of create the dynamic, because this was not set up in the book, between the two. What was the relationship between the two? What's the dynamic? How do they interact with one another? Why does President Snow, Donald Sutherland's character, listen to Philip Seymour Hoffman? And so we created the scene, and you can see it in the trailer, where Snow says, she needs to die, and Philip Seymour Hoffman says, I agree, but in the right way, in the right time. And what's interesting is that Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is pitching this idea of her becoming a symbol for the rebellion. And you have to be very, very careful about killing somebody that's becoming a symbol, because they could just become a martyr.
Right.
And the symbol could get even stronger. So his whole pitch is to ruin the image before you get rid of the girl. And there's this great moment where he's in the scene where he's saying, crack down on the districts, right? Plan this wedding. Katniss is supposed to get married to PETA. Plan this wedding, put it on TV, crack down on the districts, have live whippings that we broadcast on
Right.
TV, and hangings, and get rid of any little luxury that any of these people might have.
Starve them.
And while you're doing this, show how she's living it up while she's going to get married. And Philip actually, just in improv and rehearsal in the scene, came up with the sequence that you'll see if you see the movie, where he starts saying that, we'll have, floggings, and you see her trying on the wedding dress. You cut it against her trying the wedding dress.
Right.
You have public executions, and you see what her wedding cake is going to look like. And this great juxtaposition to show that she's becoming one of the capital.
Right. And I think that's interesting. It's tricky to play with that, because you also are carrying a big franchise, or what's becoming a big franchise. So you have to, it's interesting to me because it's revolutionary, and then at the same time it becomes about the costumes. It becomes about Jennifer Lawrence's pixie haircut, when you're traveling. It's a very interesting fine line that you're treading, which I assume when you go on to Mockingjay, which are the next two, which is the symbol, you will work out.
Yeah, well, what's interesting. You bring up, let's say Jennifer's haircut, and I think what's fascinating, I think about these movies and these stories, that I think that there's a lot in them that sort of mirrors what we see around us all the time, right? There's the exploitation of celebrity. There's
Yes.
things with the media, totalitarian governments, surveillance, consequence of violence, all these great ideas in there. And so we go on tour, and obviously we use the media to help promote the movies, but there's something that changes because, we're not going out on the road selling Jennifer's haircut,
Right.
That's just something that suddenly becomes this big headline because everybody's really interested that she's got this pixie cut. And that's the kind of stuff that you see in the movie, this kind of
Right.
super obsessive kind of quality that the media has over like things like that.
Right.
And that suddenly this haircut becomes it, because
And I
that's
can't opt out because Yahoo Movies does it, Us Weekly. I'm part of
Sure.
the media, so I'm not going to distance myself. But it's interesting to me. Continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Just
but
wanna-
that's kind of the Capitol. That's what the Capitol would do.
Right. They would take one because it is the story of a rebellious of an independent girl.
Correct.
The kernel of it is, and it's starting to get bigger and bigger. But if you co-opt that image, then you're the Capitol. And when you focus on Jennifer Lawrence, not as a great actress who did Winter's Bone, who broke out in Hunger Games, who's going to do American Hustle, who did Silver Linings Playbook, but you objectify her, there's something in my stomach that kind of clenches.
Yeah, but it's also, but people eat it up. Everybody,
Right.
They do it for a reason. It's because everybody's, clicking on those, news
Right,
sites and
exactly.
looking at the pictures and eating it up.
It's fascinating how it reverberates into the movie itself.
Yeah.
That it becomes something that people hopefully will then talk about. It's interesting also, you collaborated with Suzanne Collins in this. So you said that one of the things you did was, would you say backfill or back create?
Yeah.
Because it is very much, as it's written, the perspective is Katniss Everdeen. It's
Yes.
like, a writing trick. You have a narrative and it's mostly through her eyes. So you have to go in and backfill. What else did you add, subtract? What did you and Suzanne pull
Well, I
pull
think,
in?
one of the first thing that I did when I got the job was I came to New York and I wanted to sit with Suzanne and pick her brain. And what ended up happening was we sat in a room at her publisher's office, right around the corner actually from here.
Uh-huh.
And we spent 3 days together just going through the book and my notes on the book and creating a beat sheet for what we thought the movie should be. And then we brought the writer in at the end of that, and also Nina Jacobson, the producer, would sort of come in and out throughout the process, and we would sort of picture what we were working on,
Right.
and we kind of collaborated that way. But the two of us really created this beat sheet to hand to the writer, and so we were sort of sifting through the story and dropping things out. And Suzanne, I have to say, to her credit, is very good at being sort of ruthless with her own material. And she used to write for TV and has sort of a film structure that she works with even for the novels. And so it laid out quite nicely. And she kind of already had in her head the sections that she thought should get lifted.
Lifted as in taken out?
Exactly, yeah.
So
There's sort of
give us I love examples.
There's a section of the book that comes right after they've returned home from the victory tour, right around the time the Gale scene takes
right.
place,
The last
where
climb.
she's decided she wants to try and run away until she gets reaped and is going to go back into the games. That's very long. It's almost a quarter of the book, and we've condensed it way down. Even Suzanne
because there's
herself.
a little house, right, that they go to?
Yeah, we cut that, and Suzanne even called it the cinematic dead zone.
Right.
It was just this kind of sort of area in the story where she was very in her head, and she was sitting at home a lot and thinking about things, and sort of taking these little trips out into the woods, and
Right.
And so it's really, really difficult to keep in the screenplay.
Right. So she's able, and I have to say, as a writer, that I feel the books are so well written. Might be sacrilege. Twilight, I cannot read the books. Watch the movies. But I feel like the Catching Fire, the Hunger Games books, the prose is so good, the story's so good, the characters act in ways that are really consistent, and the themes resonate. That they work as books and then they work as movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's attracted, I think, the talent involved and all the cast. I think everybody just really really felt and understood the characters and found the voices consistent and also really were moved by the themes and ideas.
Awesome. Hi, Francis.
Hi.
My question is, with collaborating with Suzanne, what was a pivotal scene in the book that both you and Suzanne wanted to have in the film?
Well, quite honestly, I wanted to get as much in the film as possible, and I mean, from the book, and I think so did Suzanne. I think for the most part, it was pretty clear what wasn't going to be in, and so most of the sort of excess dropped away pretty easily, and then there was like a few leftover things that sort of lasted through the drafts and kind of were sort of slow to get dropped away, but. For the most part, I mean, we knew that we wanted the scene in District 11. That's a big key scene. You want Snow showing up at her house and sending her, on her mission. There's big key elements in the arena. There's some great sort of intimate moments with Katniss and some of the characters, throughout the middle. I think that were key to us. So, for the most part, we got all the kind of tentpole moments and definitely got the spirit of the book in the movie.
How hard was it to do that monkey fight scene?
It was very difficult. We shot that for about a week.
They're not monkeys. What are they? Orangutans or what?
No,
are they?
they're drills. They're sort of part of the baboon family. Is what we based them on.
Okay, I'm sorry. I knew I wasn't going to get that one right. But so there's this really terrifying baboon-ish scene where they're fighting. It's at that point, it's Peeta, it's
Finnick and Katniss.
And Katniss. So do you want to talk a little bit, and then we're going to go to another question. But
sure, yeah. No, we shot that scene over about a week in Hawaii, and we were shooting in a rainforest and had our actors in this sort of dammed up stream that we turned into a little bit of a swamp, and so they were standing around this kind of muck and mud and water for about a week fighting. Nothing. They were just sort of fighting the air, and I was having to describe what was happening and that these monkeys were running around. We did have a few stunt people that were dressed in these little suits that would kind of run around sometimes for eye lines and things.
Yeah.
That was pretty silly looking, but it helped.
Yeah.
And sometimes for water interaction, yeah. But it was tricky. And then we had Weta, the company in New Zealand, did the visual effects and did an amazing job. The monkeys look fantastic.
so then they just dropped that in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Francis. Welcome to New York.
Thank
I'm
you.
a big fan of your work. I'm a Legend, Constantine, and Elephant.
Yeah.
Would you compare this is one of your top films that you ever done, and would you feel this is the best?
I would. I think that, it's. I just fell in love. The reason I did it is I fell in love with the source material. I loved the story. I loved the characters, and the parameters that I was given. Inheriting this cast, it was already an amazing cast to start with. We got some more great people now, but the world that I got the chance to build, because I love world building, and the story I got to tell, and the fact, quite honestly, that you have a series of books and stories that have real ideas in them and are moving and are intense, but have real ideas that people are going to see, like in droves. I mean, that was really exciting to be a part of something like that, and to tell stories with some meaning really excited me. But it just in terms of filmmaking, it's like right in my wheelhouse in terms of the sort of naturalistic sci-fi world building. Telling a story that has some humor and has some real emotional intensity and has some thrills and can be scary sometimes. I just like the sort of full experience.
And literary adaptation is also in your wheelhouse.
Yeah,
Because
I guess.
Water for Elephants, etc.
Sure.
Hi, Francis. I really liked the first movie, and I don't know who made the movie until today. And I like the movie because I think I see our society going that way. And I see they use privileged group, use less privileged group to manipulate and use them as the entertain for their boredom. It's like Roman
Gladiators.
Empire use cage fighting, slaves, wild animals. But there's another theory called singularity. I don't know if you heard that.
The singularity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now the Google with NASA already bought first commercial quantum computer. I see that more like happen as well. So from your point of view, you think which way more like happen, singularity or the the story like
Well, I'm
movie.
gonna
Any
hope
question
for I'm
there?
gonna hope for neither. I think
You're
I'm
gonna go for
hoping neither way
humanism?
it goes. Yeah, let's go
Yeah.
for humanism. Yeah, I didn't do this movie because I think this is where we're going to end up. I mean, I think that for me making movies, when I was a kid, you like to go to movies, you like to escape, you want to be told a good story, and you want to be moved, and you want to go on an emotional journey. And immerse yourself in a different world. And I think that's first and foremost what I do is try and entertain people, truly. And on top of it, if you can also make people think, and if part of what makes a rich, storytelling experience means having sort of seeing kind of facets of the story kind of mirrored in the world around you, which I think happens in these books and in these
Definitely.
movies, in terms of some of the things that we talked about, like violence and, post-traumatic stress and the haves and have-nots and celebrity and, all those elements. I think that just makes for a more entertaining and rich experience. But yeah, I don't do it because I think that this is the way the world's going to
Right.
end up.
Hi, Francis. How are you? Could you talk about the pivotal sequence between Kiefer Sutherland character president with Katniss?
Oh, Donald Sutherland?
Donald Sutherland.
Yeah.
Okay.
The characters and the Katniss, because that was the critical element that probably spun off to the Mockingjay as well. So, could you talk about how you set it up those sequences, because it's quite a difficult sequence to put it off.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, quite honestly, it was more difficult for the actors. We went through multiple versions in the script. So as we were developing it, we started with a version from the book, and then we sort of pared it down because it was a very long scene in the book. It ended up being about, I think at one point it was a 10-page scene or something between the two of them. And we whittled it way down to, a page and a half at one point, which was about a minute and a half long. And we quite quickly realized that wasn't nearly enough, and it expanded back out. And so now it's actually a pretty substantial scene that happens very early in the film, quite structurally at about the same time in the book. And it is really pivotal. I mean, it carries through. There's sort of throughout these stories, it's the sort of first of 3 real moments between Katniss Everdeen and President Snow. And, a lot of it, I would say 95% of the scene comes straight out of the book. So that she's, he's basically in the study, and she goes in, and they sit down, and it just plays out just like it was in the book. And, it was very tricky for them because Donald had a lot to do, and Jen actually had a lot of listening to do, which can be really tricky sometimes, sort of just reacting and listening and feeling when somebody's talking at you for, 10 minutes straight. But
And
I
she's
think
great at that. I mean,
yeah.
that's one of the things that there's a stillness to her and a watchfulness that really works. in
Yeah,
this.
no, I mean she's fantastic. I mean they're both fantastic actors, and I mean Donald Sutherland's an amazing President Snow, and so I think that the scene works really really well.
Perfect casting.
Yeah, he's definitely great casting.
Good evening, Francis. I've been following your work from music to now. And as you touch on celebrity, I just wanted to know, do you look back in your early work when you were working with, multi-million-dollar, hit-making celebrities, making these music videos that millions of people were watching, and now they're going to be watching The Hunger Games Catching Fire. Did you look back and actually trying to implement any of your work from music to now? And the second part is, I heard you say that, millions of people, billions are going to be watching this, but as a fan and working in the music industry, it's very intriguing because it's when in your mind, billions of people were already watching your work and maybe didn't know what the byline was, who actually shot this. And I just want to know what you think about that, and did you look back and say, I worked with Britney, I worked with this person or that person, I used this element, and I want to bring it to Hunger Games Catching Fire?
Well, I would say that the biggest thing that I brought to this from my music video career really has to do with the Capitol, and I would say there's a sequence at a Capitol party at the president's mansion, and the style of the Capitol, and some of the fashion, especially with Effie Trinket, and because obviously in music videos we work a lot with stylists and a lot of fashion and trying various things. And there was a woman that I'd worked with, Trish Somerville, who did a Pink video with me and did a couple other videos, and we became friends, and she's really talented. And then she had gone off and done movies and did The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo with David Fincher. And so I asked her if she wanted to join this, because I wanted to make sure that the Capitol fashion was made a bit more sophisticated, so that they would feel, juxtaposed to the districts, more oppressive, and then in their kind of lavish, hedonistic lifestyle. And so I would say that in terms of like color palette and fashion, the music video world sort of connected with this through the Capitol. And yeah, what was the second question about?
Oh, the second part was you touched on there are going to be billions of people watching Catching Fire, but there already been billions of people watching your work across the world, but they never knew the byline. They saw the superstar in front of the camera.
Sure.
But now you're in front of the camera, you're here, you're going to be on Entertainment Tonight, etc. How do you feel about that? Because I feel like you are a star, so.
Oh, well, thanks.
So is
I
your
appreciate
star?
that.
So is your question like? So how does it feel to have your star clicked up a notch? Is that what you're kind of saying? Okay. Okay, already there. Recognized.
No, I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
it's interesting. I mean, it was, music videos were more anonymous for sure, because you're never out like promoting them, you make them, and, on MTV used to, I don't know if they still do, but they used to put the directors' names there. So sometimes people would see a name or know a name to videos, but now with film, you go out and you promote and you do these kinds of things and you do a lot of interviews and all that. But that's what I think it is really, I'm out there, and out here and doing this because I'm proud of the film that I've done, and just want to get as many people to connect to it as possible, and especially for anybody that's interested in in film or in music videos the way I was, that if I could be of any help in terms of career. Yeah.
Hi, Francis. Actually, we worked together on I Am Legend. And I walked in here randomly and I saw you. I was just like, wow, this is crazy. But I was a camera assistant. I don't expect you to remember me. But my question is...
Did you work with Gregor?
Yeah, I worked with Gregor.
Okay, sure. Did you leave early?
I did.
Yeah, I remember. You didn't
Busted.
stick it out. No, I know. You went.
I had
Yeah.
another project.
Yeah, I know.
But I wanted to stay on. But my question is, I remember at that time that the infected were going to be real people.
Yeah.
That we were putting makeup on, and I thought that was really interesting. But then they wound up being CGI, and it had a totally different feel.
Mm-hmm.
And most of your films, actually I've wanted to ask you this question for so long. A lot of your films have a lot of CGI heavy subject matter. So I was just curious, when do you, these are very producer, I would just want to say, that they're like huge films. They're huge Hollywood films. So when do you fight for non-CGI and when
Well,
do you...
I mean, quite honestly, I try not to do CGI, whenever possible. And so, like with I Am Legend, we wanted to do the infected with real people, and we had that group, and we shaved their heads. I don't know if you remember that. We had them dressed up. And then the first night of shooting, they looked like a group of 40 mimes running through Washington Square Park. And I started to
that's
sweat.
not a good thing.
No, it was a horrible thing. And it was that you could see really quickly that they didn't have the aggression, they didn't look right, it just wasn't working. And we did one night of shooting. And so we had to make this kind of emergency call, and we switched over to digital. And I learned a lot about working with, digital creatures on that. There's like the whole uncanny valley thing, especially that if digital creatures that look too similar to humans can start to look funky, just because the way our brains operate, and the time needed for testing and animation and all of that. And there was some really nice shots in I Am Legend with the creatures, and some really bad ones. And you run out of time, and the plug gets pulled, and it ends up being what it is, which was sort of disappointing. But now I've learned some lessons, and I try as much as possible to use real when you can use real, and be in real places when you can be in real places. In Hunger Games, we have a big monkey fight with a bunch of, crazy, really scary, kind of rabid baboons. And, it just would have been impossible. I mean, you can't train them, you can't shoot it, you can't get them to do anything, you can't get them to act like they die, all of that, so you just have to, you have to do it digitally. But we made sure that we went through the process properly this time and tested properly and used the right people, and so.
How have technical advances helped your filmmaking, and what advances do you feel have helped you the most? And by the way, what did you shoot this on? If you can, since we are in the Apple Store, if we could have some of the technical details, that would be much appreciated.
Sure. Well, we shot this. We shot this on film. 35. This was real film. Yes. The new ones we're shooting now are digital, but this was film. So the majority of the movie is 35 millimeter anamorphic, and then we also shot a large portion of the arena in 70 millimeter 15 perf IMAX. So go see it in IMAX for your midnight show. And technical things. I mean, I would say the most advances I think would be in terms of sound and editing and visual effects for me. Now that we're shooting digital, there's a bunch of advances that I really like in terms of digital. I think the digital cameras are great now. I think that the color is amazing, and the latitude that they have is amazing. And you can use anamorphic lenses now, and you get full use of the sensor, which is great. But in terms of editing, the editing speed and the memory and visual effects and the kind of visual effects that you can do and the speed at which you can do them is just incredible. And also the workflow in terms of sound, so that the editorial department and the sound department and the visual effects department, just the way that they can all work together now and bring and start people working very early in the process, you can just get a lot more done, so you can go through many more iterations. So I would say most of the sort of advances are on the post front.
And now, now you're going off to Paris and Berlin. You said to scout?
Yes, to scout. Yeah.
So the journey continues.
Yeah, we were just there on the tour to promoting the film, and now I go back because we're doing our tech scout. We shoot in May and June of next year out there for some of Mockingjay.
Well, thank you very much, Francis. It's been a total pleasure. I'm sure that the people here are going to go see the movie, and I'm going to see it again this weekend with my 14-year-old.
Awesome.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.